Everyone, the subcommittee on water, oceans, and wildlife will come to order. Good morning, rather, I should say. The subcommittee's meeting today. This is day 2 of our hearing on Colorado River drought conditions and response measures. Obviously, a very important subject. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at this hearing are limited to the chairman and ranking member. This allows us to hear from our witnesses sooner and allows members to better keep their schedules. In addition, please note that as with our in-person meetings, members are responsible for their own microphones. So please remember that you can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noises. Finally, members or witnesses who experience technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes to make an opening statement. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us for the second of our 2 meetings on Colorado River drought conditions and response measures. As we heard during our first meeting on this very important subject last week, the Colorado River, which serves 40 million people and fuels $1.4 trillion in economic activity every single year, is currently experiencing a 21-year drought that is greatly exacerbated by climate change. Now, last week, we heard testimony from the Interior Department about the unprecedented drought conditions that we're seeing. In August, the department made its first ever shortage declaration in the lower Colorado River Basin, and unprecedented actions were taken in the upper basin as well to slow the declining water levels at key reservoirs that haven't been seen, levels that haven't been seen in decades. So we'll hear some of the creative problem solving today in testimony from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. That's an important part of this conversation. And I'll note that Met is the largest treated drinking water provider in the United States, serving 19 million people. Met is also collaborating with water managers in Nevada and Arizona to advance a large-scale water recycling project that once it's built can deliver enough drought-proof water supplies for 500,000 households. As we heard in testimony last week from California, Nevada, and Arizona, innovative projects like what you'll hear about from Metropolitan are going to be needed to respond to changing climate conditions. Last week, we also heard from 2 witnesses representing tribal nations. We'll continue that discussion today on the need to account for tribal water needs across the Colorado River Basin. And there are 30 tribal nations in the basin. We noted that last week. Under the Winner's Doctrine, which was first recognized by the Supreme Court in 1908, these tribes have significant legal rights to enough water from the Colorado River to secure and maintain viable homelands. But these tribal communities still face significant water access barriers with devastating consequences. For example, the Center for Disease Control, according to the CDC, American Indians and Alaska Natives are more likely than any other ethnic or racial group to be hospitalized or die from COVID-19. The data shows that one of the main factors contributing to this elevated hospitalization and death rate is limited access to running water. These and other consequences of limited running water access simply have to be addressed. So we'll hear more today as well about environmental water needs in the basin as declining water flows and high temperatures severely impact fish and wildlife. Low water levels are also accelerating the spread of invasive non-native species, reducing critical habitat and contributing to an ecological and human health crisis at the Salton Sea. As the Salton Sea shrinks due to reduced inflows and other factors, important Pacific flyway habitat is lost. An exposed lake bed is causing harmful air quality challenges for many communities. Addressing these environmental challenges must be a major focus as well as we move forward. Now, while we face a lot of major challenges in the Colorado River Basin, I must note we also have some effective tools in place to help respond to our current drought conditions. This includes the measures that we included in the Colorado River Drought Contingency Plan, which was authorized through legislation led by Chairman Grijalva in the last Congress. And many other initiatives are being led by members of this committee to help address challenges that we will hear more about today. That includes measures for near-term drought response investments in water rights settlements, water data and technology developments, resources for the Salton Sea improvement projects, and investments in drought-proof water recycling projects. I look forward to hearing from our panel of expert witnesses today on these and other response measures. And with that, I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Benz for any remarks that he may wish to give.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today marks the second hearing on the important topic of drought in the 7th state Colorado River Basin. We heard last week from federal, tribal, and state witnesses, whereas today we hear from water managers, farmers, and ranchers, and others who are experiencing the firsthand impacts of drought. Some of the witnesses here today are literally on the front lines of the devastating drought. In the cases of water managers, they answer to their ratepayers and their boards, and in cases of farmers and ranchers, they have to put food on their own table by providing agricultural commodities for the rest of America. And as we heard last week, and as we will hear today, they and most everyone else are extremely concerned that another year of this drought will make matters extremely worse. The issues facing the Colorado River Basin are identical to what communities throughout much of the West are experiencing. As I indicated last week, the development of the Colorado River has helped create the vast cities of Los Angeles, Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Denver. And its hydropower historically has been a cheaper, renewable alternative to fossil energy for over 4 million electricity consumers in the basin. The river also irrigates nearly 5.5 million acres of farmland, providing an assortment of crops that have created a massive regional agricultural economy. As we've heard from nearly everyone last week, and what we will hear today, is that the math is no longer adding up because of the 20-year-long drought. And the question then is over what to do about it, both short-term and long-term. From a historical perspective, the states, their constituencies, and the federal government have managed to find agreement on Colorado River matters, even on endangered species programs. In fact, they are now living under their agreed-upon drought contingency plans that were enacted in the last Congress and mentioned earlier by the chair. While the drought contingency plans and other matters expire in 2026, the states and other stakeholders are beginning the process to find resolution beyond that time frame, and we heard general words such as the need for collaboration and cooperation and conservation. But to what end? Have studies been done to determine how much water will be saved, how much found, how much reused? I hope today's witnesses will touch on these matters. Certainly one message that a drought should send loud and clear to everyone is we need to manage our forests better. A healthy forest means a healthy working watershed and more water for other uses. Mr. Pat O'Toole, who is literally on the ground living this on a daily basis on his working ranch in Wyoming and Colorado, will tell us firsthand that forest and rangeland restoration can provide some water supply solutions. Mr. O'Toole, Mr. Tom Davis, and others will also address what's called demand management, which could end up being water reallocated from agriculture to other purposes. As we heard last week, this could have a negative impact on rural communities and could end up harming those downstream who rely on agricultural return flows. The fact is, and we all know it, that there are no easy, simple solutions. It'll take everyone in the region once again to roll up their sleeves. Today's debate is another excellent start. I appreciate everyone's participation in today's hearing. I look forward to the testimony. Mr. Chair, I thank you for holding the hearing on this important issue, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Benz. I'm told that the Ranking Member of the full committee, Mr. Westerman, may wish to make some opening remarks. Mr. Westerman, are you with us?
He's not here yet, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well, very good. We'll go ahead and proceed then to hear from the witnesses. Before introducing our witnesses today, I want to remind everyone the witnesses are encouraged to participate in our Witness Diversity Survey created by the Congressional Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Witnesses may refer to the hearing invitation materials for further information about that. Under our committee rules, witnesses must limit oral statements to 5 minutes, but your entire written statement will appear in the committee record. When you begin speaking, the timer will start counting down, and it turns orange when you have 1 minute remaining. I want to recommend that members and witnesses use the grid view in WebEx so that you can lock the timer on your screen. That just makes everything much easier. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. The flip side of that is when I recognize you, please unmute yourself so we can hear from you right away without delay. I will allow all the witnesses to finish their testimony before we begin questions from members. And we will begin testimony from Mr. Adel Haga Khalil, General Manager of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. The chair now recognizes Mr., and I'm sorry, I think I mispronounced your name, sir. I believe it's Haja Khalil. So welcome, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member Benz, and member of subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I have submitted formal written testimony for your consideration. In my time today, I wanted to share a few points of how Metropolitan is approaching the challenge of the Colorado River, a challenge that we must all solve together. We are facing a new normal, hotter and drier days, and shrinking runoff from our snowpacks. My written testimony itemizes the building blocks of success and collaboration we have had in the past. We will need many, many more building blocks moving forward. The enormity of this challenge frankly speaks for itself. Leadership from the federal government and investments in new projects and programs will be key to addressing the challenges ahead. I wanted to go over three basic actions that I think will compromise the building blocks of success. The first thing for Southern California and our region is to transform our water strategy. The new approach that I call One Water is essential for us to move forward. One Water is putting all of the pieces of water policy, of economic policy, and community policy together into a single unified regional approach. One Water means lowering demand and making Southern California one of the most efficient water societies in the nation. Since 1990, we have invested $800 million in conservation programs that reduce per capita water consumption by 40%. One Water means converting wastewater and capturing stormwater that now heads into the ocean into a resilient drought-proof supply. Through 100 local water supply projects, 470,000 acre-feet per year were created, enough for 1.5 million households. One Water means planning for climate change and variations in our imported supplies from the Colorado and Northern California. One Water means building new conveyance and new storage to make this transformed system work better and more resiliently for all of us. We started the year with 3.2 million acre feet of storage with 1.3 million acre feet in Lake Mead. One Water means uniting Southern California's diverse communities of all walks of life into a common purpose that addresses the challenges and does not leave our disadvantaged communities behind. We'll be focused on addressing leaky pipes and direct installs for conservation measures in our underserved communities. The second set of actions is forging new interstate and international partnerships and projects. Our partnership with Southern Nevada Water Authority in Arizona to develop the nation's largest recycled water project, augmenting supplies for both Southern California and the Colorado River, is a perfect example of big and bold new actions we can take together. This project will add 150 million gallons a day of new local water supply, enough for 500,000 households. Federal investments in projects like this will help build resilience to future challenges in the Colorado Basin. My agency shares a border with the country of Mexico, the Republic of Mexico. We must make sure that there are no institutional barriers to prevent progress, whether it's partnering to improve agriculture efficiency, banking water behind Lake Mead, or providing environmental flows. Breaking down barriers is key to success. We have been able to realize 100,000 acre feet per year of water conservation with Mexico. Lastly, is to expand our partnership with our agricultural partners. The Colorado River is not an urban challenge. It's not an agricultural challenge. It's a shared resource and a shared challenge for all of us. Metropolitan works with the farming community in California to find ways to use water more efficiently and preserve and protect the underlying farming economy. Our partnership with the Bard Water District is a very promising example how farmers with seasonal crops can maximize the value of their water when a crop in the winter commands the best market price and can sell water for storage in the summer when a summer crop requires significant water yet with less attractive market return. We're exploring the same partnership with our Quatsin Indian tribes as an example of partnership we need with tribal communities. In the Palo Verde Valley, Metropolitan continues to look for innovative ways to make farming more water efficient so that following is limited and the underlying farming economy remains strong. We must show commitment to these communities. Federal investments can help. With more than 20 million in conservation investments, we were able to save 500,000 acre feet that we were able to leave in the river. In the Imperial Valley, we must support ongoing and new efforts to address and restore the Salton Sea, the shrinking Salton Sea, because with that, more conservation will be possible and we can leave more Colorado water in Lake Mead. In closing, I would say this year has been a wake-up call for all of us, for Southern California and the entire Southwest. Climate change is converting modest snowpacks into meager amounts of runoff. The era of abundance in the river is over, and the era of shortages is upon us. Reversing the decline of Lake Mead will not be easy, but I'm sure we are able to do it together and be up to the challenge. Through conservation, recycling, reuse, and collaboration, One Water is the future vision for Southern California and the river. Confronting the Colorado River Challenge as one water, is the solution for us all. Federal leadership and funding can help us make this happen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hashkhalil. The committee will now hear testimony from Mr. Enrique Martinez, General Manager of the Imperial Irrigation District. Mr. Martinez, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Huff and Ranking Member Bence. My name is Enrique Martinez. I'm the General Manager of the Imperial Irrigation District. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of this committee. IED was established in 1911 and is delivering Colorado River water to approximately 500,000 acre-feet of highly productive farmland, other commercial users, and 7 municipalities in the Imperial Valley, which is located near the United States and Mexico border in the Southern California area. The continued delivery of Colorado River water, our community's only water supply, is vital to the Imperial Valley to sustain the agrarian economy and rural existence. Since 2003, IED's water management programs have generated nearly 6.8 million acre-feet of conserved water for both on-farm and system efficiency programs, meet its water transfer obligations and storage objectives. IED and its water users' exemplary commitment to conservation with program yields of averaging nearly 500,000 acre-feet annually will ensure the long-term viability of the Qualification Settlement Agreement, or QSA, the nation's largest agriculture to urban water transfer, providing water supply resiliency to California and other lower basin. As the largest single contractor of the Colorado River water, it is in IED's interest to serve as a responsible steward of this precious national resource. IED is actively monitoring the ongoing drought conditions and forecast reservoir elevations and supports a collaborative approach to river management, including renewed efforts of the basin states to protect the long-term reliability of the system. IED will continue to work with its growers and water conservation partners to promote the efficiency management of all Colorado River supplies, and looks forward to additional consultations with federal and basin state representatives to identify further opportunities that can serve to protect critical system elevations as the next set of long-term operational guidelines are developed and implementation beginning in 2026. In the spirit of agency cooperation and collaboration, I want to share that last month on September 16, IED and the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California settled a 2-year legal dispute regarding water storage and environmental concern that will result in a number of benefits to the Colorado River system, and in particularly to declining Lake Mead reservoir elevations. The reached agreement expands the benefits of IED's successful on-farm efficiency conservation program, supports efforts to ensure the state of California supports the Salton Seas restoration commitments, and commits our agencies to explore additional opportunities to utilize extraordinary conservation to support the Colorado River system. The Salton Sea, California's largest lake, finds itself in a decline causing impacts to environmental, wildlife, air quality, and neighboring regions in Southern California, Arizona, and Mexico. The Salton Sea is one of the most important lakes of the Pacific Flyway, supporting over 400 species of birds, including several listed endangered species. In addition, as the QSA water transfer continues, the farmers implement conservation measures, becoming more efficient, and the use of irrigation water, and as dry conditions have continued to become a new normal, Salton Sea inflows have decreased significantly along with reduced flows from Mexico. Other factors such as evaporation, farming practices, local weather conditions, and urban conservation all contribute to current projections that indicate the Salton Sea will see an exposure of up to 70,000 acre-feet of previously inundated lake bed, or playa, over the next 10 years. This exposed playa will be a source of particulate matter when it becomes airborne during windy conditions if aggressive dust condition measures are not implemented and further deteriorate the already compromised air quality. Furthermore, the current salinity level are now twice of the Pacific Ocean, and a drop in surface water elevation can expose an additional more than 25,000 acres of barren zone covered playa. Much of the land is owned by the Federal Department of Interior, whose total land holding at the sea exceeds 110,000 acres. The linkage between the Colorado River and the Salton Sea is irrefutable. Transfers or other mechanisms that reallocate water away from the Salton Sea to address these shortages will hasten the demise of the sea. For this reason, protection of the Salton Sea will be necessary for any basin-wide Colorado River solutions. Federal investments are required to help prevent or reduce the impacts of future droughts. IED thanks the committee for including $250 million to Salton Sea projects in the budget reconciliation bill passed by the House Natural Resources Committee in September. Without reliable water supply, every sector of the economy would suffer, in agriculture to manufacturing to high tech. This could also impact an emerging industry in Imperial Valley, the recovery of battery-grade lithium from the geothermal brines. This domestic supply of lithium will help secure reliable minerals essential for the development of batteries and other energy storage technologies, and are important to achieving state and federal climate goals.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. We'll have to follow up on the remainder in the question portion, but we very much appreciate your testimony, and we will now hear from Ms. Taylor Dawes, Colorado River Program Director for the Nature Conservancy. Ms. Dawes, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member Bentz, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me to testify today about collaborative solutions for the Colorado River. My name is Taylor Hawes, and I'm the Colorado River Program Director for the Nature Conservancy, and I've worked on Colorado River issues for 25 years. The Conservancy is a global environmental nonprofit working to create a world where both people and nature can thrive. We work in more than 70 countries, and our Colorado River work spans all 7 basin states and into Mexico. The story of climate change is being written in water. Too much or too little water at the wrong time or the wrong place. Today, we are witnessing the uptick of climate disasters, such as deadly flooding in the east and devastating drought and wildfires in the west. While drought is a part of the West normal cycle, climate change has intensified the impacts experienced in every corner of the basin. After 2 decades of ongoing drought, we must recognize this is likely our new normal. As you've heard from other panelists, the Colorado River system is in the middle of one of the most severe droughts in recorded history, with the last 2 years hitting particularly hard. You might not, however, have heard about the impacts to our rivers and wildlife and tourism that depend on them. In Colorado this year, the Dolores River ran completely dry, resulting in significant fish kills. The Yampa River was closed to fishing and recreation for more than 3 months due to low flows and high temperatures. Low water levels can accelerate the spread of invasive species, which reduces critical habitat for endangered fish in the Grand Canyon and for migratory birds along the Pacific Flyway. As we face this deepening crisis together, we no longer have the luxury of time. The longer we wait, the fewer options we will have. We must develop a suite of tools to adapt to this new reality, or we risk increasingly difficult challenges for our communities, our agricultural producers, the $1.4 trillion economy of the region, and the iconic wildlife and landscapes of the West. Despite the dire situation, there's also hope. This basin has a track record of developing collaborative solutions. Some of our successes include effective recovery programs for endangered fish, agreements between Mexico and the US to share in shortages while also providing water for the environment in the river's delta. The 2019 Drought Contingency Plan that defined measures to slow the reservoir system's decline, and many more local solutions to address our dwindling water supply. More is needed, however, and there is increasing urgency to accelerate these and other types of efforts to prepare for an uncertain future. Programs and opportunities that this committee should consider that will help this region adapt include the following. Solutions that reduce consumptive water use in the basin across all sectors. resilience strategies such as forest management that can improve snowpack retention while restoring forest health and minimizing catastrophic wildfires, agricultural programs to improve soil health, restore wet meadows, modernize our infrastructure, and test regenerative agricultural practices. Decision-making processes that are transparent, inclusive, and promote buy-in. This includes voices that have historically been underrepresented in the basin's management decisions, such as sovereign tribal nations and environmental stakeholders. Support ongoing recovery program efforts, such as passing Representative Negus's HR 5001, which will allow the 2 Upper Basin recovery programs to continue to operate through fiscal year 2023. Expand and improve existing programs such as WaterSmart to allow more flexible management of water resources through multi-benefit projects that decrease water consumption. Invest in scientific tools that will help us adapt more quickly as conditions continue to change. This includes planning for a range of scenarios to ensure we are ready for a future with declining river flows, not just the river we have today. In other words, things could get even worse than what we are experiencing today. To wrap up, the future will not look like the past. This basin can be a model of sustainability and adaptation, but federal and state investments are needed now to give us the chance for a thriving future. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony. I will be available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dawes. We'll now hear from Mr. Pat O'Toole, President of the Family Farm Alliance. The chair recognizes Mr. O'Toole for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman and Ranking Member Bentz and the members of the committee. And it's really an honor for me to be able to testify on such an important subject. I am a rancher and farmer on the headwaters of the Colorado River. Our irrigation starts 20 miles from the Continental Divide. We're the first irrigators of this part of the Colorado River, and this summer celebrated our 140th year at this ranch. And so we have seen good and bad, up and down. There's nothing to compare with what's happening right now from a drought perspective and water supply perspective. And I've said that in my testimony, and my testimony is somewhat prodigious. And I'd like to thank Dan Keppen, our executive director, and my board that goes from the Imperial Valley to here on the Colorado River for information. But we live this, and I am in a situation where our family is trying to figure out what's the next steps for us. I just spent 3 months in the National Forest with our cattle and sheep. We're done with our use this year, and I spent my life riding horses through trees. You don't do that anymore. The forest is collapsing on itself because of a combination of pine beetle, aspen death, and a lack of activity to deal with those issues. It is so frustrating for us who have known really for years that things weren't right. And now that we have established, whether it's the California fires or what we're learning here, is the relationship between a healthy forest and water are absolute. I was a legislator in Wyoming in the 80s and 90s, and our county is the headwaters of both the Platte and the Colorado River. And I was involved in negotiations and discussions between the states and the state of Wyoming on both rivers. At that time, we had a statistic that came that I've testified before, is that 160,000 acre feet of water is not going down the North Platte River because the forest is not functioning correctly. The same thing is on this side on the Colorado River. We don't have the numbers now, and how a healthy forest would respond are numbers based on the snowpack that we get. But the absolute relationship between a healthy forest and water management is so important for us to understand. I give speeches occasionally, and I talk about the hopefuls and the hatefuls. And the hopefuls are the people that I've worked with for 30 years in my community. We have a model community of working with NRCS, with the Interior Department, with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And we have seen absolute correlation between the kind of work we do on the ground and wildlife and water quality, water quantity. to be in that kind of a model with 30 years of success of river restoration, of trout passage on our whole river system, and to watch the forest be in the state that it's in breaks your heart. My leader, who's been here 30 years, really 20% because they wouldn't let me in the forest. And that's because the hatefuls that I refer to are the with the dead forest. We should have been acting. We have not acted. We need to act. And I just would implore on a bipartisan basis us to realize if we're going to have the systems that produce food, that have wildlife, that have rural communities, we have to act. I've been on multiple boards and nationally, and the food issue, 50% more food is identified by everybody. Everybody in the world knows that we need to be producing more food. We're producing less. We're losing farmers and ranchers. We're losing the ability to use our water in a way that allows us to produce food. I look at the demand management, for example, as a place that we're going to take water off the ground at a time we need to produce more food that'll have huge effects on wildlife. We need to think through these, how do we recharge an aquifer when we take water off the ground, for example. So there's so many pieces to this puzzle that, I'm happy to be able to be a resource for the committee. I would invite any committee or your staff to come and look at a working watershed at the Upper Colorado River and see how it actually can happen. But I appreciate very much the opportunity to talk to you today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. O'Toole. Want to next recognize Mr. Tom Davis, President of the Agribusiness and Water Council of Arizona. Mr. Davis, welcome to the committee. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member Bentz, and members of the committee. My pleasure to have the opportunity to testify before you today concerning the ongoing drought on the Colorado River. As you stated, my name is Tom Davis. I'm manager of the Yuma County Water Users Association. I also serve as president of the Agribusiness and Water Council of Arizona, and also the Yuma County Agriculture Water Coalition. Arizona agriculture is on the front lines of the current 21-year drought on the Colorado River, and we stand to be impacted the most from this management of this drought. As a result of the first ever shortage declaration at Lake Mead, Arizona will face an 18% reduction in our annual diversions from the Colorado River in 2022. Arizona farmers who receive water from the Central Arizona Project will be hit the hardest. In places like Pinal County, irrigation districts will see a 70% reduction in their surface water supplies in 2022 and 100% reduction in these supplies in 2023. This will result in significant amounts of farmland being fallowed and the trickle-down effect from reduced farm revenues, jobs, equipment, seed purchases, food production, etc. In addition to major water supply concerns, we have depleted reservoirs and reduced water releases will reduce power generation on the river, reducing electricity available for states like Colorado, Arizona, Utah, California. This reduced power production and the need to replace it from other sources is expected to translate into double-digit increases in electricity rates and potential brownouts during heavy electricity use periods. Hydropower revenues are used on an annual basis to pay for numerous power costs associated with federal endangered species programs that Taylor referenced and other environmental requirements. However, covering these costs through power rates in future years will become a significant hardship, and we would like to work with subcommittee on resolving this issue. Long-term, the Agribusiness Water Council and the coalition are focusing on working with other water users and the Bureau of Reclamation to ensure the renegotiation of the 2007 guidelines in managing the river and set the stage for sustainable, predictable, equitable, and legal operations of the Colorado River system after 2026. As part of this effort, we are working with agricultural water users throughout the upper and lower basin to present a unified set of outcomes we believe must be achieved by the Colorado River Compact decision makers. These outcomes will be the core principles that underpin our efforts and are outlined in my written testimony and will be detailed further by a white paper we plan to release later in the year. Water from the Colorado River is the lifeblood for agriculture in Arizona and throughout the basin. In Yuma County, water from the Colorado River fuels a $3.4 billion agriculture economy and provides for 90% of the U.S. production of leafy green vegetables in the winter months. Colorado River delivered through Central Arizona Project is the reason Arizona is among the top national producers of vegetables, melons, milk, cattle, and other crops. In order to stretch our water resources even further, we continue to make significant improvements in irrigation system practices, equipment. This includes canal lining, using sprinkler and drip irrigation, laser leveling fields, soil moisture monitoring, and efficient water delivery methods by using SCADA, just to name a few. Farmers are also changing cropping patterns when economical to save water. The national importance of Arizona farmers and ranchers, along with decades of improvement and use efficiencies, are important to understand as we work to address the drought and the future water management. This is especially in recent media coverage of the drought that seems to be pushing the narrative that water should be reduced to from agricultural use and provide more water to growing cities and environmental purposes. This is the wrong approach and the wrong solution. We certainly don't want our food supply to be trapped in supply chain interruptions as we're currently seeing in this country. We will be happy to work further with other water users in the basin to develop long-term solutions. Thank you again for the opportunity to present testimony. I'll stand for questions later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. And before we go to our next witness, let me just clean up a little housekeeping item that I had meant to address in my opening remarks. We would like for Representative Susie Lee of Nevada and Paul Gosar of Arizona to join us today as part of the hearing to ask questions of the witnesses. So hearing no objection to that, it is so ordered. We had intended to have Congressman Joe Neguse introduce our next witness, who is Ms. Ann Castle, a senior fellow at the Getches Wilkinson Center for Natural Resources, Energy, and the Environment at the University of Colorado. Mr. Neguse sings your praises, Ms. Castle, and regrets that he's unable to be here for that introduction. But I want to pass along his best wishes and recognize you to testify for the next 5 minutes. Thank you and welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman, and good morning, Ranking Member Benson, members of the subcommittee. Thanks very much for the invitation to testify. My work focuses on Western water policy issues, and particularly the Colorado River. And from 2009 to 2014, I was the Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of the Interior. The Colorado River Basin has been the lightning rod for climate change shocks to the water system. Last year, Lake Powell's water levels dropped more than 50 feet. And that represents a loss of over 4 million acre feet of water in just 1 year. If we have another year like the one we just had, Lake Powell's level will drop below the hydropower turbines in Glen Canyon Dam. So in less than a year from now, there wouldn't be any power generation at Lake Powell. And the Upper Basin's ability to continue to meet its obligations under the Colorado River Compact could also be in jeopardy soon after that. And even that scenario could be optimistic. You've heard about the substantial and really exemplary efforts of the states, Interior, the major water users in increasing their conservation, releasing water from upstream reservoirs, working on additional recycling, and a whole lot of other good work. And this committee's funding proposals for the Salton Sea and large-scale reuse projects will also help to bring balance to the system. But despite all those efforts, the reservoirs continue to decline. What we have is a water imbalance, a math problem, as you put it last week, Chairman Huffman. And there's really no getting around the fact that this means that everybody has to use even less water, just as Mr. Costa said. So we need a plan that shares the burden of these reduced supplies, but does it in a way that promotes equity among the states, between the Upper Basin and the Lower Basin, among the various sectors of the economy, including the agricultural sector, and with the Native American tribes. And the Colorado River Basin has a history of coming together around collaborative agreements for management of the river. And the water leaders in this basin have been rightly celebrated and admired for their collaborative efforts and the results. If you look at those past agreements, there are two ingredients they all had in common. One was hydrology. It has to get really bad before there's sufficient motivation to act. And the other common ingredient is a directive or a deadline from the Department of the Interior. Both of those factors were critical in spurring the agreements that led to the 2007 guidelines and the drought contingency plans. Well, we've certainly got the bad hydrology right now, but there has not been a directive or a deadline from Interior or a default plan that could go into place if the collaborative agreement that everybody wants doesn't come together quickly enough. So the point I want to emphasize is the need for speed. The urgency of what we're experiencing and the rapid declines in the reservoirs mean that we need all the available tools to be deployed. And you've heard about a lot of those tools. It's just not clear that the river will allow the current pace of discussions to continue without devastating consequences. I also want to mention the need to ensure that all tribal communities in the Colorado River Basin have clean and safe water to drink. We have a window of opportunity with the infrastructure bill to make meaningful progress, and the funding that's provided there is absolutely essential to close the gaps in drinking water infrastructure in Indian country. We owe it to these communities to provide them with the same basic level of service that most Americans take for granted. Thank you again for the invitation to speak today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Castle. I want to remind members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions, and the chair will now recognize members for any questions they may have. I'll start by recognizing myself for the first 5 minutes of questions. So, Mr. Haj Khalil, I'd like to begin with you. Thanks for your testimony. I have appreciated the testimony we've heard about the Regional Recycled Water Project that your agency is advancing with partnerships in Nevada and Arizona. And despite the regional benefits that this project promises, it also builds on something a little different and new from Metropolitan. And I want to ask you a little about that. We think of Metropolitan as this giant wholesaler that imports distant water supplies and wholesales them to the entire Southern California region. But in recent years, you've actually begun investing in developing local supplies. And I want you to, if you could, please talk about how this regional water recycling project fits into that strategy of local water supply development and why that strategy is so important for reducing reliance on imported water supplies from places like the Colorado River and the Bay Delta.
Thank you, Chairman, for the question. Actually, I come to Metropolitan with a history of the last 32 years of integrated water solutions, and I believe strongly in for us to really meet the challenge of the changing climate, the issues with the shrinking water supply. We need a new Metropolitan, and we need what I call a new Mulholland moment for the future that is not importing water. What I tell people, what made Southern California great is the three aqueducts we have coming in for the last 100 years. We need right now a fourth aqueduct, which is not going to be a pipeline. It's going to be a combination of a puzzle, a number of things that is really providing more local water supply for us to be resilient for the future, to be able to deal with the drought, which is going to be with us for the future. This is the new normal. We need to start investing in a number of things, especially recycling our water, conservation, recycling, and reuse. So stormwater and wastewater are critical. For the last many years, I think the last decade, we've invested in over 100 local projects that we were investing in subsidy for agencies to build recycled water, to build more local water supplies. But Metropolitan now is in the business of providing and creating new water. So this project we have, Regional Recycled Water Project, that hopefully we will rebrand as Pure Water Metropolitan, is a partnership of recycling 150 million gallons of wastewater into clean, pure water that we can recharge our aquifers, we can reuse across the region. And this is in partnership with our partners in Arizona and Nevada. So investing in us here and creating more local water supply, creating more storage, more connectivity, uh, conserving, capturing every drop and storing it for the future is going to help us here reduce the dependence on the imported water and then provide this ability to put more water in Lake Mead to reduce our dependence on Colorado, allow for this ability to resolve the issues that we're negotiating right now with the 7 states and the country of Mexico and the 5 tribes, because I believe we need this holistic solution. And your help at the federal level is critical. So really, One Water, Southern California, is a new thing that we're embarking on. We've finished our integrated resource plan to show the gap between demand and supply. And we're right now building the roadmap to really create more local water supply here and store it together. So it's exciting times, and this is all about One Water and collaboration.
Thank you, Mr. Haji Khalil. 150,000 acre feet every single year, drought-proof water supply. That's a big deal. That is a lot more water than some of the large new surface storage projects that we sometimes fight about in this committee. So I think it's important for everyone to understand exactly what you're proposing here. And the possibility that it could be a model for other opportunities. And let me just ask you about that. Do you see other possibilities for large scale water recycling as something that could be pursued by yourself and others in the West?
Yeah, I mean, to me, as you know, in our region in LA, Los Angeles, the ratepayers passed Measure W, which is stormwater capture, infiltration, and reuse program. We want to make sure that our groundwater basins are healthy and safe. So the investments in cleaning up our groundwater is critical. Building storage in our groundwater basins so we can store water when we have water available and be able to use it when we have a drought. That, what I call the pieces of the puzzle, is there. So we're working with San Diego. San Diego is starting their Pure Water San Diego, a program similar to what we're doing here. We have folks up in Las Virgenes in our area are building Pure Water Las Virgenes. This collaboration is going to be great. And Los Angeles is building similar project. We're partnering with the city of Los Angeles on building Operation Next, which is it's going to double this 150,000 acre feet of water. It's going to be done also at the Hyperion plant. So imagine now we have 2 rivers, 2 aqueducts locally here. So it's going to be great for us. And this is not just for the Southern California, this is for the entire Southwest. And to me, this is what I'm sending the message is investing in Southern California is investing in the entire Southwest, and your help is critical for us on the federal level.
And thank you for that, because that was the last thing I was going to ask you. You've explained why this is such a valuable part of a water supply portfolio for the region. You've talked about the broader regional benefits, but in the remaining time that we have, let's talk about why it's important for the federal government to be part of this partnership. And you do have partners in this. It's not just Metropolitan going it alone. But why do we need the federal government to step in and to do more?
It's in 2016, I was part of developing the water resiliency report for the U.S. And it was critical to know that water security is a homeland security issue. Without water, there's no business. Without water, there's no jobs. And for us to resolve the issues we have in the Bay Delta, the issues we have around the Colorado that we're talking about today, and having to get agreements around the allocation of water around with the 7 states and the state of, or the country of Mexico and the 5 tribes, we need to make the pie bigger, right? We need to make the pie bigger, and we need investments in creating more local water supply. To me, helping us, and I want to acknowledge Representative Napolitano and her bill on HR 4099 on large-scale water recycling projects and continuing to invest in Title 16 water. To me, that's essential. It's not for Southern California, as we talked about, Congressman and Chairman. This is about us resolving the issue and making the pie bigger. When you have more water and local water supply is part of it, we can resolve the issues and really help us put more water in Lake Mead. So it's essential for the whole Southwest.
Thank you, Mr. Haji Khalil, for putting that in context. That's very important. And I'm going to go to the ranking member now for his 5 minutes. And Ranking Member Benz, my clock was doing funny things in the middle of that last 5 minutes. I think I might have magically gotten some extra time. I didn't do it on purpose. I apologize, but we'll recognize you for 5 minutes or whatever the clock may give you.
Mr. Chair, I'm hardly one to complain about taking too much time, so I won't. So my first question is for Mr. O'Toole, and it has to do with the fact that as a farmer rancher myself, I often am asked how to protect the water for farmers and ranchers, and many times I'll respond by saying, well, what farmers and ranchers are you doing to conserve water to advance your or our conservation approaches? And what I'm met with many times is this: Congressman Benz, we farmers and ranchers would love to invest big piles of money in much more refined conservation application techniques, but without the certainty of having the water, why would we ever do it? Can you talk about that problem and why it might, without that type of certainty, result in a continuation of the wrong type, or perhaps not the most efficient uses of irrigation systems?
Thank you, Ranking Member Benz, and appreciate the question. As I said, our family is the first irrigators off the national forest at the headwaters of the river. So we have an opportunity to use our water in an efficient way. We're actually a demonstration for the Fish and Wildlife Service on how you irrigate and meld fisheries and irrigation. So we're, and our whole community has done a series of processes throughout all the head gates to make sure that efficiency is being done. But if we're going to be honest with ourselves, part of the future is assessing watersheds and having small storage as part of the mix. Just like forestry is going to have a whole bunch of tools, the water community has to have tools based on the amount of water that could be available. Our community is working right now on a very small storage project, which would have huge implications to us. But as the Family Farm Alliance knows, and as you know, in the Klamath Basin, the inability to have sufficient predictability is death. And, you know, I tell people I wish bankers cared about climate and conservation, but they care about getting paid back. And they get paid back because a farmer has the predictability of the water supply.
There's much discussion, Mr. O'Toole, about the fact that cities can buy up ranchers and farmers' water because the value to people in the cities is greater. There's more people in the cities and they can raise more money. We saw the outcome in California of that, drying up communities that surround Los Angeles, and the damage that occurs to the agricultural industry as a result. Do you think that ultimately this is going to happen in the Colorado Basin? Are we going to see the cities buy up all of the ranchers and farmers' land?
It's certainly it's happening now in a way that we're watching people buy water in Colorado, for example, that they intend to turn around and use for urban growth. And, you know, recently, Pat Mulroy, who fought as hard for water for Las Vegas as anybody, said that LA, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and Denver are no longer, or Phoenix are no longer sustainable. What that means is the only water for growth that's left is ag. We are the reservoir for growth. And as I mentioned earlier, we're expected to produce 50% more food in a world that's demanding more food. And at the same time, we're taking water away. And I know in the western slope of Colorado, I'm on what's called the Yampa Roundtable. And we feel very strongly that more diversions away from here for an eastern slope of Colorado that wants to double their population and their growth. It's not sustainable. And I think, you know, the cities, as I've watched over my career, have built up reserves and they need to figure out conservation on a much bigger scale. You know, I applaud we're looking at technology to develop more water, to reuse water. That's going to have to be the future. But we have to realize that the systems that we all count on are being depleted, and further depletions have an incredibly rolling thunder effect.
They certainly do. And Chair, I know I'm growing close to the end of my time, so with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Benz. The chair now recognizes Mr. Soto of Florida for the next 5 minutes. Mr. Soto, I didn't mean to surprise you. Our batting order has been moving around a little bit, but are you ready to go? All right. Since Mr. Soto may not be with us just now, we'll go to Representative Lee from Nevada. Representative Lee, are you ready to go? I apologize, folks. We've had some confusion in our batting order here. Thankfully, the chairman of the full committee, Representative Grijalva, is in my screen, and he's always ready to go spontaneously and always ever so articulate. So we look forward to hearing from him for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me, a couple of quick questions. Mr. Lee, and I apologize, I really do. Having a lot of vowels in my name, it's always frustrating.
Thank
Say it right. You know, the regional recycling project that you talked about and people have lauded, and that it's for the entire river basin. You talked about the federal government increasing its investment in these large-scale recycling programs, and the chairman pointed out the net benefit at the end. You talked about Representative Napolitano's bill. Talk a little bit about what it's overdue, and I think another panelist said there is an issue of speed being imperative and urgency being the imperative. How do you see in terms of the investment and how quickly this needs to be done?
Chairman Halva, thank you very much, and thank you for your leadership on your efforts in Congress. We all understand that for us to really deal with this changing new normal on shrinking water supplies and where the snowpack is no longer our storage system, we're seeing very small amounts of runoff coming from the snowpack because of this extra heat. So what we need to do is create our local water supply. And our local water supply is every drop that we can recycle is critical. So we are looking at expediting our regional recycled water project. I actually tasked my team to look for alternatives to expedite the design construction of this project. Our board, the board of Metropolitan, earlier this month, authorized us to start the process of getting and approving alternative delivery methods for design build to get this going. We're also looking for alternatives to see if we can build small decentralized recycled water project to get going fast enough where we have the supply is there, the demand is there, and we can put the supply closer to the demand. So we're
And
moving on that one, and we're going to get
Is that where
going.
if I may, if that's where the investment in terms of the federal arm of this discussion needs to be, right?
It's the money that we need. Is actually we need investments. The $3 billion, and we're saying the $3 billion that needs to be invested here. It's a benefit for the entire Southwest, the entire country, and it should be helped by the federal government.
Thank you very much. Ms. Castle, thank you for your testimony. That, states, tribes, and the federal government must do to develop and make use of the best science and climate data to inform water management along the Colorado River. And as that date of 2/26 approach that that is, I don't think we have the luxury of time here. You said about speed, and I agree with you. How do, in dealing with management plans, the role of science, the role of climate data, and the role that needs to play as we lead into 2/26, plus all the intermediate interventions that we need to do around important issues like recycling and other things. But where are we at on that? And then the second part of the question is, who's at the table? We legitimately, indigenous people and tribes have been kept off that table and need to be an integral part of it. We heard from agriculture and from Mr. Davis from Arizona about we need to be at the table because of the importance of the resource we bring. Urban users, conservationists, environmentalists, and other extractors in industry. So who has to be at the table? Because at least my experience in Arizona, that table's been unbalanced. There has been significant groups of stakeholders that have not been part of that process. And how can the federal government ensure that there's equity and there's balance and we're hearing all the opinions going forward?
Thank you, Chairman Grijalva, and I'll try to give brief answers to your questions. With respect to science and data, there are a number of things that we can invest in and improve our ability to manage the river. Our stream gauge networks need to have continuous investment and need to be amplified and improved. Several of the witnesses have mentioned things like OpenET, which gives us a much better handle on the consumptive use of water throughout the entire basin. There are things like the Airborne Snow Observatory that tells us much more precisely how much water we can expect from runoff in these systems. And Mr. O'Toole's testimony mentioned the need to have better quantification of the water supply benefits that come from better forest management. And I think all of those are important. They are long-term fixes. And sorry. With respect to the participation of tribes, I'll just be very brief, and I don't speak for any of the tribes, but I will note that the testimony of many of the state representatives that you heard from last Friday specifically mention their commitment to involve tribes in these river management discussions. And Daryl Vihill's testimony last week suggested the formation of a sovereign governance team to be the formal process for making that happen.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank
Dr.
you very
Casey.
much. You're back, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we will now hear from Representative Gonzalez Colon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all the witnesses for coming today. I got a question for Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis, you said in your testimony that there's a narrative suggesting that the current Colorado River drought conditions may require a reduction in agricultural water to use to relocate or reserve more water for cities and environmental uses. Can you tell me why, and in your opinion, this will be a wrong approach, and what alternatives or solutions you should be we should be considering instead?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that's a narrative that's being promoted not only by maybe folks that represent cities, but also there's a movement on the Colorado by hedge fund managers to actually purchase agricultural water along the river and transfer it to cities. Obviously, cities, growing cities, and the cities of Southwest are all growing, as we all know. They're growing like crazy. But even if all the agricultural water is moved to cities, eventually that growth will outstrip the water that's moved there. So again, there will be a shortage of water. I like the approach Matt is taking with reuse. I think the cities really have to look at reuse and any other method to stretch their water supplies, just like agriculture is doing. And if there's a silver lining to this drought, it's requiring us all, ag and city users, to take a look at how we use our water and become much more efficient. I know agriculture is doing it. Water is just another cost input that agriculture producers have to figure in, along with fertilizer and fuel and labor and all the other cost inputs. So by nature, to have a productive business, to make a profit, they have to spend less on water every year if it's possible and produce the same amount of yield. So I think that we all have to look inward at our uses and become much more efficient.
Thank you,
Just
Mr.
this
Davis.
matter of transferring water from one use to the other certainly impairs the economy in one method or another.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I do have some questions for Mr. O'Toole, but I will yield the remaining time to Ranking Member Cliff. That's
Thank you, Congressman Gonzalez Colon, very much for your generosity. A question for Ms. Haas, Nature Conservancy, and the question has to do with one of the solutions that we could actually scale up if we could get litigation out of the road, and that means getting back into the forests. And so what can Nature Conservancy suggest that we might do to stop the litigation that's preventing us from repairing the watersheds that would do so much to help the Colorado system?
Yes, thank you for the question. I understand there has been controversy in parts of California and Oregon over forest management. I think in the Colorado River Basin, we do have a track record of working together. And I think the last few fire seasons have really put a spotlight on this issue and our need to work together. So, I had a fire across the valley from us just a few weeks ago. This is an issue that affects us all, and there's so many co-benefits of good forest management. So, for right now, the Nature Conservancy is doing research to map some of these forests that really have the right combinations of benefits that could be for forest health, but also retention of snowpack. Not every forest will operate the same way. And so we first have to identify those forests that will have the greatest return on investment. And I think, we have a long history of working with Family Farm Alliance and others this is the time. We need to get in the room, start figuring out where is our common ground and how can we find these solutions together and put money on the ground and start to treat our forests so that we can improve our watersheds.
Thank you so much. And since I think used the balance of Congresswoman Gonzalez Colon's time, I want to yield back, but thank her again for her generosity. Yield back.
All right, I think the gentleman will now recognize Congressman Costa for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and both of the subcommittee and the full committee. This is an important hearing. We had 3 hours or 3.5 hours last week, and everybody's moving around with a lot of stuff going on here. I'd like to kind of talk about the inner relationships between water in the West, where multiple sources receive water from, and make it a point. While hearing is focused on the Colorado River, one water management decisions and infrastructure repairs on one basin impact water basins in another region. As an example, California, we're trying to restore canals that will help improve our drought resistance and bring groundwater supply into balance, dealing with an important piece of legislation that the chairman knows about, which is SGMA to get our groundwater management in place. Given our conveyance infrastructure and given the efforts on both the bipartisan infrastructure package and reconciliation, where we're having funding for drought relief and for repairs and infrastructure, Mr. Hajikalia and Mr. Davis, could you explain how improving, repairing conveyance infrastructures in basins outside the Colorado River could help with regards to not only the Colorado River's demands, but also dependence on the CVP and the State Water Project? And Mr. Hajikalia, welcome. I think you must be the 4th or 5th general manager for Metropolitan Water District that I've now worked with. So
thank you very much. Thank you for your leadership, and it's an honor to work with you. And really, it's in Southern California, we have 2 major sources of water: the Northern California, the State
right, and the Colorado.
So really, what we're having in the same issue we're having is shrinking water supply when it comes to the State Water Project. But the biggest issue we have is the 20% of the capacity of the project, State Water Project. We lost it because of the need for repairs. And I think this is important that we restore the capacity in the State Water Project, that we build storage, that we continue collaborating and finding ways to ensure.
Well, the bottom line is we could do that. And
Yeah,
because
we
of my
have to
time's
do it.
limited to 2:30, I don't want to go,
Sure.
but the subcommittee chairman and I are working on that. We're working on something that will limit the transevaporation through, and also create more energy through a concept of use of solar panels. And we'd like you to embrace that and work with
Sure.
us on that effort.
I will.
Mr. Davis, obviously you're in the Arizona situation, but to the degree that we can, and Metropolitan, frankly, California, if you look over the last 30 years, and I've been a part of all of that with the quantification agreement and other things, has gone from 30% state water, 30% Colorado River, and 40% local supplies. In the 1980s, local supplies for Met was 0. So it's been a tremendous, I think, effort that's taken place here. But Mr. Davis, you think we've got to use all of the water tools, all of the above, when we talk about the Colorado River system, upper basin and lower basin?
Well, certainly, and one of the things we're constantly concerned with here on the Colorado, being at the
Right.
the last diverter on the river,
Right.
we're constantly aware of water that's transferred out of basin for Met's use, for the city of Denver's use. We're constantly hoping that they do these practices just outlined.
Well, and we're trying to do that. I guess I would take issue with, as a 3rd generation farmer, Mr. Davis, water is more than an input cost. Without where water flows, food grows, and without the water, we don't have to worry about the other input costs.
Exactly.
So,
without the water, we have a desert.
Right. Ms. Hawes, the drought continues in the Colorado River Basin, and for that and for California, what projects is the Nature Conservancy looking at to prevent depletion of groundwater aquifers in water stressed areas And could you stress any best practices you've identified to help communities, whether it's in the Colorado River Basin? I'm obviously concerned about the San Joaquin Valley and the extreme drought conditions we're facing.
Thank you for the question. We do have multiple projects addressing the groundwater issues. In California, we certainly have been working in the Central Valley to restore rice fields with additional groundwater that can be recharged, but also provide habitat for birds, migratory birds.
That's very important, grasslands and such. If you could, my time's expired, but if you could provide a list for the committee of those projects, I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, thank you with the subcommittee, and we'll continue to work on all of the above at committee hearing. And like
Thank you,
usual,
Mr.
I'll
Costa.
submit my questions that I didn't get a chance to ask.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Costa. The chair now recognizes Mr. Gosar for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding this important hearing. The water on the Colorado River has been the source of ongoing challenges, near shooting battles between states and generations of legal wrangling. The past, in many ways, is the future. We will see these fights continue, state versus state, federal government versus states, urban versus rural, agricultural versus household, species versus everyone. In this mix are real people, communities, tribes, and others who are working on eking out a living from their water rights. I have a question for Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Davis. By the way, good seeing you, Tom. Water in the West has been a blood sport battle between layers and layers of different players. Unfortunately, water battles have been reached a zero-sum game, meaning there are winners and losers. But the future appears increasingly a negative-sum game, meaning there are only losers and worse losers. While urban water agencies talk about efforts to reduce per capita consumption of water use, the fact is the regions are still growing. We heard that earlier. As a result, we see demand continue to rise. Meanwhile, drought, species conservation, and increased demand all result in agency courts and water masters looking to cut water allotments. Isn't the real solution new supply things like creative desalination, potential advances in atmospheric water generation, and other options like resettling like the Lower Santa Cruz water system with Mexico to grow our water resources instead of finding ways to do with less? Mr. Davis first.
Yes, obviously augmentation methods such as desal, cloud seeding, all those should be considered. Long term, and there's begun to be some discussion, there needs to be probably some imported water from other watersheds. We've just outgrown the supply in the Colorado River Basin, and as growth continues to occur here, it puts more pressure on taking ag water to other uses, and that, as you've heard, impairs our food production and our food supply. So I think we need to look long-term into other sources that we just mentioned.
Yes, and I think collaboration with Mexico, I think, is a golden opportunity to win-win-win.
Certainly.
And then
Certainly.
the second part is creative desalination. When you look at subsurface water, particularly in southern Arizona, we got heavy metals and a lot of arsenic. So why can't we clean water as we're utilizing water in creativity? And if sea levels rising, why would we take advantage of the desalination?
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. Desal from the Sea of Cortez, exchanging that water with Mexico for their mead water is certainly something that's being considered and looked into. Reclaiming and cleaning underground water supplies that are somewhat contaminated. Some of that's located in the western part of Maricopa County. That can be done. We have a groundwater mound here in Yuma that can be considered as a resource for the Yuma area. So we need to look at all sources, obviously, and I think the thinking has come around to do that. Although that takes time and planning, and this drought bites a little harder every year, and so immediate results are needed, and sometimes those solutions are more long term.
Mr. O'Toole?
Thank you, Representative Gosar. It's curious you asked the question. I had people in this room at my house 2 days ago who are looking at, in the upper Colorado River, we're taking coal bed methane water that is developed in the upper Colorado and injecting it to 7,000 feet, tens of thousands of acre feet. That's good water. without a tremendous amount of,
Doing that in Mexico
intervention.
too. In New Mexico, we looked at the same thing on.
Yeah, there's opportunities everywhere. We just have to become um, more aggressive. And you know, as I told you, I'm humbled to be here, but I can only tell you we have to have an accelerated process to be able to get things done. It's so thank you for the question.
Well, and I think we can do two things at the same time. I think that's what the advantage is. We got to be creative about this. I worked with the Nature Conservancy over and over again. You know, looking at Southwest forest, particularly in Arizona, there's a win-win situation with the replenishing of our aquifers, looking at creative solutions that, you know, help us, not divide us. So from that standpoint, you know, Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit for the record a letter on behalf of Stephen Lewis, the governor of the Gila River tribe. They wanted to make sure that everyone knew that they've been participating. They're looking at solutions to trying to help out. And so I'd like to submit that for the record.
Without objection, that will be submitted. And Mr. Gosar, your time has expired, but thank you. And
Thank you.
the chair now recognizes Mr. Soto for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Fires, droughts, low snowpack. We see the drastic and terrible effects of global climate change deeply hurting Western United States. The American West has a real long-term water challenge. And we're excited that in the bipartisan infrastructure package, there's $50 billion for Western water storage. And there's more we could do in the Build Back Better Act, as well as the legislation proposed here today for farmers, for tribes, for so many communities, for habitat, of course. And I'm really excited about the measures that the committee is proposing for drought response relief, for short-term federal drought relief, for implementation of tribal water rights and settlements, for large-scale water recycling, for federal priority stream gauges, for drought contingency plan implementation funding, endangered species recovery and conservation programs, desalinization projects, and Water Smart. I also wanted to see if Representative Costa or if Representative Huffman would like additional time, knowing that this is affecting your districts deeply. Chairman, would you like some additional time?
You know, I appreciate that. I don't see Mr. Costa right now, but I will take the gentleman up on his courtesy.
I yield to the
And,
chairman.
Mr. Costa, you still there? All right, well, I'm going to move ahead with a question for Ms. Hawes because I wanted to bring Fish and Wildlife into this conversation. And we have heard about some of the drought's impacts on fish and wildlife and the tourism industries that depend on them. But I want to ask Ms. Hawes to tell us a little bit more about why preservation and enhancement of fish and wildlife must be a key consideration now and in the upcoming negotiations over what the Colorado River is going to look like post 2026. Ms. Hawes?
Thank you for the question, Chairman. I think there's three different real important pieces of this. First is just the inherent value of our wildlife. This is an area that gets billions of dollars from tourism. So there's an economic benefit in addition to just protecting and preserving the species that call this area home along with us. We also, I think, can avoid endangered species conflicts that we've seen in other places. This basin has a history of working together on very effective recovery programs. We're seeing downlisting of 2 species right now. That means our work is successful, and we want to continue that work so we can avoid conflicts. And then lastly, it's the health of our river systems and our species are a canary in the coal mine. If we start seeing those species die off, the system is crashing. And so our hope would be that we can develop the interim guidelines and the next river operations to include those environmental benefits on the front end so we don't end up with these conflicts on the back end.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hawes. And I will yield the balance of time. And again, thank the gentleman from Florida. The chair next recognizes the good-looking gentleman from Idaho. Please don't tell Mike Simpson I introduced him this way, but Mr. Fulcher, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate those comments very much. I have a comment and a question for Mr. O'Toole. Mr. O'Toole, I am from Idaho, and we are facing some challenges in my home state. There is a debate happening where potentially there could be the removal of 4 of the lower Snake River dams, and investigations continue on that. The argument in general is by removal of these dams that there could be increased salmon flow, which is it is highly questionable. And so whatever we do with the Colorado River system has implications in the Pacific Northwest in terms of precedent. First of all, you mentioned, I believe, that your family had been operating on your existing farm and ranch for more than 140 years. Could you tell me if this drought that we're going through right now is an anomaly, or are you aware of drought conditions that have existed in previous decades?
Well, my lifetime has been, thank you, Representative Fulcher, but going back and forth drought, and I was asked one time, would you rather have drought or lots of water? And obviously, lots of water is better, even though it has issues too. This is different, and our family right now is drilling 4 wells, putting pipelines for our livestock operation to replicate the springs that we've lost. So, in my view, from a personal perspective, this is an anomaly that hopefully won't be the clear future. We did have some rains this fall that really saved us in our operation, but this is different than what we've experienced in the past.
And I assume part of that struggle is the increased demand on the water, correct?
Yes, sir. The demand is part of it, and as I mentioned earlier, the trans-basin diversion from the western slope is for growth. And we, for example, the people in Colorado that when they're requested to build a new subdivision, that's their legal responsibility to find that water. Well, what we're finding is that water only exists from agriculture. And, when you try to figure out who's driving this growth, it's the guys with the big hats with the feather that are, wanting to build a subdivision, make a lot of money, but there's no understanding of the farm issues, the food issues, the wildlife issues, all the things that are, coexistent with that. And I think we've got to have a broader view of what our society is going to be.
Thank you, Mr. O'Toole, and thank you to you and your family for your work and perseverance there. Shifting to Mr. Martinez before my time is up. Mr. Martinez, there is a significant infrastructure along the Colorado in terms of water retention systems and irrigation retention systems, power supply systems. Does your organization view that system as a homeland security issue at all? Can you speak to that, Mr. Martinez?
Certainly. Thank you for the question, Representative Fulcher. Yes, this infrastructure has been built over 100 years and been operating basically to provide vital water here for the district and all those farming activities as well as the cities that we serve along the Mexico-U.S. border. Within this areas, we have also military installations that are vital to the United States, as well as large reserves of lithium, which is another critical element that the nation is looking forward to produce domestically. So from the perspective of food supply, again, the health of the economy here in the southern part of the state of California, and military installations as well as new products of lithium is definitely a situation where we see water being vital to maintain those securities going forward.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Fulcher. The chair now recognizes Representative Lee for 5 minutes. I think you may be muted. There you go.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Chairman Huffman and Ranking Member Benz for hosting these hearings on drought conditions on the Colorado and for once again providing me the chance to participate. As we discussed last week, Southern Nevada and the entire desert Southwest is facing an unprecedented drought. And in my district, Congressional District 3 in Nevada, Lake Mead, which provides water for 25 million people across Nevada, Arizona, and California, is at its lowest level since its construction in the 30s. And on Monday, I was pleased to visit with Vice President Harris Lake Mead and appreciated her commitment to the very issues we're discussing here. To help address this crisis, much more must be done to accurately measure consumptive water use, including programs like OpenET. And I want to thank Ms. Hawes and Mr. Hadjikalil for recognizing this program in their testimony and supporting the passage of my bill, the Open Access Evapotranspiration Data Act. Very long name, but I introduced this legislation with fellow colleagues on this committee to establish a program that uses publicly available data from satellites and water stations to provide estimates of consumptive water use. This data will support water conservation and management efforts of farmers, ranchers, and water utilities. And I've also been working to secure federal funding for large-scale water recycling projects. My colleagues and I have successfully secured federal funding to advance large-scale water recycling projects in the bipartisan infrastructure bill and Build Back Better. Mr. Hadjikalil, as you mentioned in your testimony, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California is participating with the Southern Nevada Water Authority and others to develop multi-billion-dollar water recycled, regional recycled water project. How will this project and your partnerships with Nevada and Arizona help bring water supplies in demand into better balance on the Colorado River?
Appreciate your leadership, Representative Lee. And one thing I want to say is you cannot manage what you don't measure, and let's appreciate your leadership on that. This is about partnership, and I tell you, when we start now, we need to open ourselves up to look at the region as a whole. And Metropolitan is partnering with Southern Nevada and Arizona on finding ways to really collaborate on generating more local water supply in Southern California and conservation here, and partnering with the agricultural community, because every drop we can save here, every drop we can recycle will be a drop that we can put back in the river in Lake Mead to help recover from this new normal. So to me, it's all about partnership. And without the federal government and your support in investing in us, we cannot do it. And this is about the Southwest. And we're meeting next week in your state as the 7 basin states to talk about this and how we're going to work together. But I'll tell you, the collaboration and level of collaboration from the agencies, I haven't seen more collaboration, but we can't do it alone. We need your help at the federal level.
Thank you. I agree. I can't emphasize more how important these partnerships are. Ms. Hawes, I just wanted to speak. You talked about what should be done through better forecasting and modeling, tracking water availability. How can innovative tools like OpenET, stream gauge monitoring, and other programs through the USGS and the Bureau of Reclamation help farmers, ranchers, and water utilities better manage their usage?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for your leadership on that bill. I agree. We can't manage what we can't measure. So these tools are critical for helping everyone in the system, from a farmer on an individual farm to an irrigation district to the Bureau of Reclamation, be able to get a better handle on what's actually happening on the ground. Where is our water being used? How is it impacting a particular river system? What's happening in that subbasin? And all of that can help us craft better decisions, better solutions, and manage this resource more carefully, because if we've learned anything, we're going to have more awareness of just how all these things interconnect. So we're very supportive of the OpenET program and the other tools.
Thank you. With that, I'm finished with my questioning. I think a combination of both looking at innovative solutions, but also all of this data, which to me is surprising that we don't have it so far at this point in time. So very important pieces of legislation. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes Representative Boebert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is good to see Mr. O'Toole here today, who has a lovely ranch in Craig, Colorado, which is in my district. Thank you so much for testifying today and for all the work that you do. The drought has forced us to start thinking long-term about the availability of water in the West. Too often, the discussion focuses on how agriculture, energy, and rural Americans must change their livelihoods while largely neglecting the shared responsibility or urban city dwellers. I think an important piece of this discussion needs to revolve around active forest management, especially on our federal lands. It's no secret that our forests are not properly managed. A healthy forest is an actively managed forest. Active forest management activities such as large-scale thinning of trees will reduce water stress in forests and ease the severity of droughts as more water will end up in our rivers and reservoirs. It's by no means the end-all be-all solution, but it is a major part of the solution. And that's why I've introduced my Active Forest Management, Wildfire Prevention and Community Protection Act, which requires the Forest Service to harvest a minimum of 6 billion board feet per year. My bill also removes incentives for extremist groups to file frivolous lawsuits that slow down projects. Democrats like to pretend that climate change is to blame for everything. And yes, the climate is changing 4 times a year, in fact, but these same alarmists fail to take active measures that can address the changing climate. It's too often the case that radical environmentalist groups will sue in court to stop any active forest management activities. What's the Democrats' response to this? Nothing. They're too scared to go against these powerful special interests. Just yesterday, the 10th Circuit ruled against a BS environment lawsuit trying to stop a logging project within the White River National Forest in my district. In 2015, the Forest Service began holding meetings to harvest timber and manage long-term health of the forest. Out of 2.3 million acres of the National Forest, the Forest Service allotted 1,061 acres for logging. What were the planners alleging? Apparently, the government failed to consider the efforts of climate change on fungi in the region. After a district court dismissed this lawsuit, the plaintiffs appealed, and thankfully, the 10th Circuit upheld that decision. We all know that logging on 1,000 acres in a forest that has 2.3 million isn't increasing climate change. And if that is really our focus, then we need to start harvesting this timber, because just one wildfire burning in Colorado alone, like we saw last year, produces more carbon emissions than all of the vehicles in the state of Colorado running 24/7 for an entire year. And that's produced in just a few days. And so if we want to stop these massive tinderbox that we're creating with the more than 6 billion standing dead trees, we need to begin by addressing that. Now, Mr. O'Toole, I have a question for you, and I want to talk about desalination. In your testimony, you mentioned that it needs to become part of the discussion. It's my understanding that Israel has made large-scale investments in these operations and currently receives roughly 80% of the country's drinking water from it. The technology is very popular in Saudi Arabia, where 5 million gallons are produced every day, which accounts for 50% of the freshwater usage. And is this a scalable technology that could be used in Colorado for agriculture or hydropower generation?
Thank you, Representative Bobart, for the question. And yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned a specific project in northwest Colorado, southern Wyoming, taking coal bed methane water and minimally cleaning it and putting it into the system. You know, we've been working on that for 10 years. I actually testified to this committee about it with Representative Napolitano years ago. So yes, it is scalable, and obviously you know, the lessons are that Israel is doing some phenomenal stuff. I will tell you that the Israelis come and meet with Family Farm Alliance farmers in California about the technology they're using also.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Toole. And Mr. Chairman, I'm running out of time, and so I don't have my question for our other witness, Mrs. Hawes. Maybe I'll submit that to the record, but I would like to ask for unanimous consent to add this Reuters article titled Desalination Advances in California Despite Opponents Pushing for Alternatives to the record.
Without objection, that will be entered in the record. And I thank the gentlelady for expressing her concerns about extremist groups, maybe not the right ones, but it's a good start.
Oh, give it up, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank all the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions. We'll ask the witnesses to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days of the hearing, and the record will be held open for 10 business days to allow for responses. If there's no further business before the subcommittee, then without objection, we stand adjourned.